Good morning. My name is Channing Moss, and my research proposal has to do with the mitigating effects of cross-ethnic relationships within the rural African American student populations. According to Amanya Taylor, 2016, and Brenner and Wang, 2016, discrimination has negative effects on student well-being, academic outcomes, and increases externalizing and internalizing behaviors. And so Brenner and Wang, 2016, in their study, they found that cross-ethnic relationships actually mitigate the prominence or perception of racial discrimination. And so in their study, in which they used an urban population of mainly Latino students, they found that these cross-ethnic relationships actually correlated with decreases in reported racial discrimination. However, the current study, due to the lack of information or lack of information on how these mitigating effects happen within a rural community and with the African American population, my study focuses on whether or not cross-ethnic relationships correlate with decreases in perceived racial discrimination within rural communities. And so, as a null hypothesis, of course, is going to be a statement that between groups, there'll be no difference in perceived discrimination with those students who have cross-ethnic relationships and those students without cross-ethnic relationships. And as an alternative, of course, I'm going to believe or hypothesize that that these cross-ethnic relationships are going to correlate with decreases in perceived discrimination within this population. For the study design, in order to test these hypotheses, is a cross-sectional design and a between groups design. Both groups, one group being African American students with cross-ethnic relationships, and African students, the other group being African American students without cross-ethnic relationships. So the population is going to be done by stratified sampling with a participant pool of 234 African American 8th grade students from 5 middle schools in rural Virginia. And these middle schools are going to be perceived, the ones I've looked at so far, to have a numerical majority of Caucasian students. So this makes sure that the African American group is a numerical minority in the situation. Only participants who identified as ethnically African American will be included in the study. Excluded will be those students who identify as mixed or were raised by parents who do not identify ethnically as African Americans. The instrument that's going to be used to measure discrimination-related distress or perceived racial discrimination is the Adolescent Discrimination Distress Index created by Fisher et al. In 2000. This measures the frequency of racial discrimination or incidences of racial discrimination. It is comprised of 15 items that are presented on a Likert scale, 5-point Likert scale, in which participants are asked whether or not the incidence is attributed to racial discrimination, or if the discrimination is attributed to race, and whether or not how this upsetting the incident was. So ranging from upsetting to extremely, not at all upsetting, to extremely upsetting. In order to test the statistical differences or variance between the two groups, a individual samples t-test is used or will be used in order to measure the differences between the mean ratings of racial discrimination from the group of African American students with cross-ethnic relationships versus the group of African American students without cross-ethnic relationships, to see if there really is a difference or correlation in which cross-ethnic relationships correlate with a decrease in perceived racial discriminations or reportings of perceived racial discriminations. And I believe that is all. I look forward to seeing you all's presentations and discussing my presentation with you all.